The Los Angeles morning was already bustling, sunlight reflecting off the glass towers that lined the streets like polished giants. Helen maneuvered through the crowd with the ease of someone accustomed to the chaos of the city. Her coffee in one hand, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder, she kept her focus sharp, eyes darting between the sidewalk and the blinking screen of her phone. Deadlines never waited. "Excuse me," she muttered, sidestepping a man who nearly bumped into her. The man turned. His presence was commanding even in the subtlety of a casual stroll. He had sharp, chiseled features that could have belonged on a magazine cover, pale blue eyes that seemed to analyze her in seconds, and hair the color of dark wheat, slicked back with effortless style. His tailored navy suit fit him like a second skin, and the faint scent of something expensive followed him like an invisible cloud. Helen froze for a second longer than she should have. Something about him was off. Not dangerous exactly, just unnervingly magnetic. She shook her head and stepped aside, trying to convince herself she wasn't staring. "I think I owe you an apology," he said smoothly, his voice low but clear with a subtle accent she couldn't place. He reached out instinctively as though he'd noticed the laptop bag she had almost dropped in the collision. "It's fine," Helen said, brushing past him, trying to sound casual. But her pulse had jumped. She wasn't used to this, the kind of attention that made her stomach twist in both irritation and a strange curiosity. He didn't move to follow her, yet she felt the pull of his gaze on her back as she continued down the street. It was the kind of gaze that made the air feel heavier, tighter, like the world had shifted just enough to make her aware of every movement, every heartbeat. Helen shook her head, muttering under her breath. "Get it together, Helen. It's just some guy." But she knew it wasn't just some guy. There was an intensity in his eyes, a confidence so palpable it bordered on dangerous. And she hated to admit it, she was intrigued. Her office was a 10-minute walk away, and by the time she reached the revolving glass doors of the high-rise, the city seemed to recede into a dull background hum. The bright sunlight of the morning reflected off the polished floors, and the murmur of people starting their day was familiar, grounding. She let herself exhale, trying to shake off the lingering thoughts of the man on the street. As she rode the elevator up to the 15th floor, she didn't notice him stepping into the lobby behind her. Helen's office was open plan, sleek, minimalistic. She slid into her chair, logging into her computer, and tried to focus. But the memory of his eyes lingered, the piercing blue that seemed to look right through her, the faint curl of a smirk that hinted he knew something she didn't. Then a ping. Her email inbox blinked insistently. She frowned. Nothing unusual, just the daily flood of memos, meeting reminders and proposals. Yet, she had a subtle sense of anticipation, as though she were expecting someone. She scolded herself. She wasn't a teenager with a crush. She was Helen, professional, smart, and fiercely independent. She glanced up from her screen to stretch her neck and froze again. He was there. Standing near the window, arms crossed, looking out at the cityscape as if he owned it. His reflection on the glass made her heart skip a beat. How had he gotten in? Security was tight here. Access cards, codes, and cameras everywhere. Helen's first instinct was to call out, "Can I help you?" But the words caught in her throat. Something about him wasn't threatening, yet there was undeniable power in his presence. A power that demanded attention without force. "Helen," he said, finally turning toward her. The sound of her name on his lips made her chest tighten unexpectedly. You know my name?" Her voice was steadier than she felt. He stepped closer, casually, yet there was precision in every movement. "I know many things about you," he said, and there was no humor in it. "But mostly, I know you're someone who doesn't like being underestimated." Helen blinked, slightly taken aback. "That's flattering," she said cautiously, unsure how to react to a man who seemed both unnervingly personal and impossibly confident. His eyes flicked over her as though assessing every detail, from the confident way she held herself to the subtle crease of her brow. "I don't flatter," he said simply. "I observe. And I'm fascinated." Fascinated. The word lodged in her chest. She wanted to step back, to remind herself this was just some mysterious stranger, probably wealthy, probably dangerous in ways she didn't understand. "Look," she said, finding her voice. "I don't even know you. So maybe you should leave?" He tilted his head, studying her with the faintest trace of a smirk. "I could," he said. "Or I could stay and make sure you remember this encounter." Helen swallowed hard, irritation mixing with something else, curiosity, intrigue, and a threat of something she wasn't ready to name. She clenched her fists under her desk, trying to anchor herself. Before she could respond, the elevator dinged and a colleague stepped out, drawing her attention. He smiled, a small, knowing smile that hinted at secrets he wasn't willing to reveal. And then, as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone, leaving only the echo of his presence and the faint scent of something expensive and intoxicating. Helen stared at the empty space where he had been, heart racing, mind spinning. Something about him was unforgettable, dangerous, compelling, and she hated herself for being so aware of it. For the rest of the day she found herself scanning the streets, the office lobby, even the reflection in her computer screen, half expecting to see him. But he was nowhere. Yet she knew. Somehow, she knew this was not the last she would see of him. Her phone buzzed. A message appeared, anonymous, with only 3 words. "See you soon." Helen's hand froze over the screen. A chill ran down her spine. "Great," she muttered to herself, trying to convince herself she wasn't excited. "This is going to be interesting." And for the first time in a long time, Helen realized that curiosity, dangerous, thrilling, and utterly irresistible, was already pulling her into someone else's orbit. Someone like Cylian. The next morning, Helen's apartment felt unusually quiet. The city outside her window was alive with the usual LA chaos. Sirens, horns, people hustling. But inside, there was a calm that made her recent encounter with Cylian replay in her mind like a persistent echo. She brewed her coffee slowly, letting the aroma fill her kitchen, and tried to focus on the day ahead. Meetings, reports, deadlines, it was her world, a world where control meant survival. But her mind kept drifting back to him. His piercing blue eyes, the faint smirk that had suggested he knew more than he let on, and the way he'd disappeared without a word. Shaking her head, she muttered, "Get a grip, Helen. He's just a distraction." Yet, as she walked into her office building later that morning, something told her distraction might have a name, and a plan. The lobby was busy, filled with the usual corporate crowd. As she swiped her access card, her heart skipped for no apparent reason. And then she saw him. Cylian. Standing near the elevator, casually leaning against the marble wall, as if he had been waiting for her. Helen froze. She forced a smile and waved briefly, but he didn't acknowledge it. Instead, he straightened, eyes locking on hers with that same unnerving intensity. It was impossible not to feel the weight of it. "Why is he here?" she whispered under her breath. Before she could overthink, her assistant rushed over with a stack of papers, pulling her attention to the mundane tasks of the day. Yet, throughout her morning, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every glance from the corner of her eye reminded her of Cylian's presence. By lunchtime, Helen convinced herself she'd imagined it. Maybe the city had a way of making people appear in the periphery, a trick of the light and crowded streets. She walked to her favorite cafe across the street, needing a moment to breathe, to reset. And there he was. Cylian, sitting at a corner table, casually sipping what looked like an espresso, but watching the room like a predator assessing the terrain. The moment their eyes met, Helen felt a flicker of both fear and something far more complicated. "Coincidence?" she murmured. "Just coincidence." But when he stood and approached her table, a subtle smile playing on his lips, she knew better. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, voice smooth as silk, carrying the faintest edge of amusement. Helen hesitated. Her instinct screamed no, but something in the way he looked at her, intense, unwavering, made her pause. Against her better judgment, she nodded. He sat, leaving just enough space to be polite, yet close enough that she could feel the faint warmth of his presence. "I don't usually do this," he said, not looking at her, eyes scanning the busy cafe. "Intrude on people's lives without reason." "Then why me?" she asked, curious despite herself. He finally turned to her, those blue eyes locking onto hers. "Because I can't stop noticing you. You're different. Not afraid, not fake, not ordinary." Helen narrowed her eyes, unsure if she should be flattered or unnerved. "Different isn't always a compliment." "I know," he said almost casually, leaning back in his chair. "But I think in your case, it is." She tried to hide her racing pulse. His confidence, his intensity, the subtle danger he radiated, it was intoxicating. And she hated how much she wanted to be drawn in. Their conversation flowed, cautious at first, then more relaxed. Cylian asked just enough about her life to feel personal without overstepping, but he was careful, guarded, revealing nothing about himself. Yet, Helen couldn't shake the feeling that she was seeing cracks in his carefully constructed facade. Something private, hidden, and significant lay beneath the charm. As she got up to leave, she noticed a small object sticking out from the edge of his messenger bag. A bright, childish backpack, the kind a 5-year-old might carry. Her curiosity piqued. "You're Bag, she said casually, trying not to sound as interested as she was. Interesting choice of colors. Cylian's eyes flicked to the bag and then immediately back to her. His smile was calm, controlled. I have many interests, he said lightly, but his tone suggested deflection. Helen made a note in her mind. Something was off. He was hiding something and she had no idea what. He walked her to the street as she headed back to her office. The city's hum surrounded them, but for a few minutes, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them. I'll see you soon, he said as they parted, the words deliberate, almost teasing. Helen felt the weight of them long after he disappeared into the crowd. She tried to convince herself she wasn't thinking about him, but every thought, every idle fantasy she tried to suppress, centered on Cylian. By the time she returned to her desk, her mind was spinning. She had deadlines, meetings, reports to write, but none of it mattered. All she could think about was him, the magnetic pull of his presence, and that hidden something she had glimpsed, the backpack. Helen shook her head, muttering, "This is dangerous." It was. She could feel it in her bones. There was no denying it. Cylian wasn't just a man she'd met on the street. He was a force, calculated, deliberate, and already threading his way into her life. And though she tried to push it away, she knew one undeniable truth: she would see him again. Because Cylian had made sure of it. Helen hadn't slept well the night after their cafe encounter. The memory of Cylian's piercing blue eyes and that subtle, knowing smirk haunted her like an echo she couldn't shake. She tried to tell herself she was imagining things, that it was all harmless intrigue, but deep down she knew he was different. Dangerous, yes, but fascinating in a way that made her pulse quicken and her mind restless. By Friday afternoon she found herself walking past his building again, her steps unintentionally drawing her closer to the sleek glass facade of Cylian's penthouse. She knew she shouldn't be there. Curiosity was dangerous, especially with someone like him. And yet, her feet moved as though guided by some invisible force, as though her body remembered the magnetic pull of his presence before her mind did. She hadn't expected him to be there, yet when the door opened he appeared, leaning casually against the frame as if he'd been waiting. The intensity in his gaze made her stomach twist, equal parts irritation and desire. "Helen," he said, his voice carrying that same low, smooth resonance that had haunted her dreams. "You're persistent." "I'm not here to be entertained," she said, crossing her arms. "Just passing by." He smiled faintly, but there was something unreadable in it. Passing by or following curiosity? She bristled at the insight, yet couldn't deny it. "Curiosity is dangerous," she said, her tone sharper than she intended. "Sometimes dangerous is worth it," he replied, tilting his head, his eyes scanning her like he could read her thoughts. Before she could respond, he turned, beckoning her to follow. Hesitant but intrigued, she allowed herself to be led into the building and up the private elevator to his penthouse. The interior was luxurious but understated, modern art on the walls, muted tones, and the faint scent of something woody and expensive that seemed to cling to the air. "You're hiding something," she said bluntly, unable to stop herself. Cylian paused, looking at her with an unreadable expression. "Is it that obvious?" "It's not just obvious," she said, stepping closer, her curiosity cutting through the tension. "Something about you, it's off. Or maybe it's locked away. Either way, I can feel it." He regarded her quietly, then gestured toward the living room. "Sit. I'll show you something." Helen hesitated but obeyed. Her instincts screamed caution, yet her fascination overrode fear. Cylian moved to a cabinet and retrieved a small backpack, brightly colored, clearly for a child. He placed it on the table in front of her, leaving it slightly open. Inside, a few items peeked out: a small stuffed animal, a pair of tiny shoes, a school notebook with childish handwriting. Helen's breath caught. "A child?" she asked softly, unsure if she should be speaking. "Yes," Cylian admitted, his voice quieter than before. "One I try to keep private. From the world, from the press, from anyone who might complicate things." He met her eyes, the vulnerability there briefly piercing the mask of confidence. "For me sometimes. It's complicated." Helen studied him carefully. She had expected arrogance, charm, even ruthlessness, but not this. Not this human fragility. "Why are you telling me?" "Because I can't lie to you," he said simply, leaning back in his chair. "I don't want to. You're different. And I've never wanted anyone like this before." Her heart raced. Every warning in her body screamed at her to step back, to run. And yet, the pull toward him, the dangerous intensity of his gaze, was irresistible. "Cylian, this obsession you feel, this intensity, it's not safe." He smiled faintly, almost ruefully. Safe has never been part of my vocabulary. And neither has normal. But you challenge me in ways I didn't think possible. I'm not good at subtlety or restraint. I never have been. Helen's pulse quickened. His honesty, raw and unpolished, made her want to lean in, to give in, but fear kept her poised. And your child? She asked, her voice steady despite the rapid thrum of her heart. My child is everything I protect, he said, his voice tightening. And everything I can't expose. Not yet. But I also can't hide it from you. Because I can't hide you from me either. The words hit her like a wave. There was no denying the intensity, the danger, and the obsession. And for the first time Helen realized she wasn't just fascinated, she was caught in it. A silence settled between them, thick and suffocating in the most thrilling way. Helen wanted to push back, to assert control, but something in the way Cylian looked at her, vulnerable yet commanding, made her pause. Then, as if to break the tension, Cylian leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. I didn't ask for this, he said quietly, but I can't stop it. Not you, not this feeling. Helen swallowed hard. Her instincts screamed caution, but her heart whispered a dangerous truth. She wanted him too. She wanted to see what it would be like to step into his world, to challenge him, to understand the man behind the obsession. And yet, even as she took a small, tentative step closer, she sensed the shadows around him. The ex-wife, the hidden pressures, the secrets he carried. There was danger here, palpable and real. But so was the pull, magnetic and undeniable. Just as she opened her mouth to respond, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. He isn't the only one watching. Helen's stomach dropped. Her mind raced. Someone knew about Cylian, and perhaps about the child. Or maybe even about her. Cylian's expression darkened slightly when he noticed the change in her face. It seems our world isn't as private as I thought, he murmured, tension creeping into his usually controlled voice. Helen looked at him, heart pounding. This just got a lot more complicated. Yes, Cylian agreed, a dangerous glint in his eyes. And now there's no turning back. The pull between them was stronger than ever, intense, obsessive, and undeniably dangerous. Helen knew she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't fully understand, something that could consume her entirely. And deep down she realized she wanted it. The late afternoon sun bathed Malibu in a golden glow, the cliffs shimmering over the Pacific like a fragile promise. Helen's car wound up the narrow coastal road, each turn bringing her closer to Cylian's secluded cliffside property. The drive should have been calming, but her nerves were taut, her thoughts consumed by him, by the man she was irresistibly drawn to, and by the child he had hidden from the world. Her phone buzzed again, an anonymous text. Tonight everything changes. Her stomach twisted. Someone was watching them. Or perhaps it was a warning. She didn't know which terrified her more. By the time she arrived, Cylian was already waiting outside, the sunset illuminating his sharp features and pale blue eyes that seemed to pierce through the fading light. He was dressed casually, but every movement carried the precision and confidence that had marked him from the very beginning. Helen, he said, voice low, carrying both relief and an edge of warning. You shouldn't have come here alone. I could say the same, she replied, stepping out of the car, her gaze unwavering. Cylian, someone is involved in this. Someone knows. His expression darkened, the vulnerability from before replaced by steel. I've been careful, Helen. Extremely careful. But now, he trailed off, eyes scanning the horizon. Now it's no longer just my life we have to consider. Helen's pulse quickened. My life? She echoed. Are you saying I'm involved in this because of you? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took her hand, gripping it with an intensity that made her blood run hot. Yes, he admitted quietly. You're involved. And I won't, let anyone hurt you. Not now. Not ever. She looked at him, torn between fear and the overwhelming attraction that had been building since their first encounter. Cylian, this obsession of yours, it's not just attraction. It's dangerous. His jaw tightened. I know. But I can't stop it. You're not just someone I want, Helen. You're the only one I've ever truly been obsessed with. The only one I can't walk away from. Her chest tightened at his words. There was vulnerability beneath the obsession, a raw honesty that left her both terrified and craving him even more. They entered his cliffside home, the interior minimalistic, yet the sense of luxury and control was palpable. The panoramic windows showcased the vast, glimmering ocean below, a reminder of both freedom and isolation. And the child? Helen asked cautiously. Your secret, your life outside of this. Cylian's gaze softened just for a moment. He walked to a small bedroom tucked off the main hall and gently lifted a framed photograph from the dresser. It was a picture of him and a small boy, no older than 6, smiling in a park. His hand lingered over it, and his eyes glimmered with a mix of pride, guilt, and love. "This is everything I protect," he murmured. "And yet I can't protect you from my obsession." "From me?" Helen swallowed hard. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted. "Being with you, knowing the intensity, the danger." Cylian stepped closer, placing his hand over hers. "Then don't think about it," he said, voice low and urgent. "Just feel. Because if you run now, if you resist, everything you've felt, everything you've discovered about us, will be gone. And I won't forgive myself, or you, for leaving it behind." The room seemed to shrink around them, the world narrowing to the space between them, the pull undeniable. Helen's resolve wavered. She had warned herself, tried to fight the chemistry, tried to protect herself. But now, standing there, she realized she might not walk away. Before either of them could speak further, a sudden sound shattered the fragile moment. A car horn blaring outside, followed by the unmistakable crunch of gravel as someone sped down the cliffside driveway. Cylian's eyes hardened, scanning the horizon. "It's them," he said, his voice a dangerous whisper. "They found us." Helen's heart pounded. "Who?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled her close, as if shielding her from the danger beyond the windows. The child's room seemed worlds away, a reminder of everything he was hiding, everything at stake. Then, without warning, the front door burst open. A masked figure rushed toward the house, and Cylian's protective instincts ignited instantly. He grabbed Helen, pulling her behind him, shielding her body as he moved with precision and lethal efficiency. "Stay down," he ordered, voice taut with controlled panic. "I won't let anything happen to you." Helen's chest tightened, not just from fear but from the intensity of the man in front of her. This was Cylian in full force. Obsession, protection, desire, danger, all intertwined. She realized, with a mix of terror and thrill, that he was completely, utterly, dangerously obsessed with her. The intruder's figure loomed closer, silhouetted against the fading light of the ocean. Helen could feel Cylian's tension, his readiness to fight, his refusal to let anyone ever touch her. And in that instant she understood fully, this was not just about attraction or obsession. This was about survival. His obsession wasn't just desire, it was a declaration. A gunshot rang out. Helen screamed. And then, silence. Cylian was gone. For a moment the world felt suspended. She stood frozen, the child's photo still clutched in her hand, her heart hammering, unsure what had happened, whether Cylian had been taken, hiding, or worse. And from the shadows of the cliffside property, a cold voice whispered, "He can't protect you forever." Helen's chest tightened. Her mind raced. Questions swirled. Where was Cylian? Who was behind the attack? And most terrifying of all, what would happen to the child? The golden Malibu sunset cast long shadows across the room, a stark contrast to the storm that had just begun. Helen realized, with a mix of dread and reluctant anticipation, that nothing would ever be the same again. And she would have to face the dangerous obsession that had already ensnared them both, alone.